Hello, I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and you're welcome to the Dairy Edge, the Teagasc Dairy podcast. We're bringing you the latest information, insights and opinion to improve dairy farm performance. With a love of land and farming, Olin Greenan travelled to New Zealand to farm for a year in 2001 after college. Over 20 years on, and still there and thriving, we hear how his dairy career has gone from strength to strength, and his passion and pride for farming has sustained.
Well, I suppose, Emma-Louise, I've got to thank my parents, and particularly my father, for that love of the land. Back in the stony grey soil of Monaghan, young nipper there, and I suppose of an early age, I know nothing else but farming. Great recollection, and there's one particular Irish Farmer's Journal. I used to race to that. My brothers would be going to the shoot in the Match magazine, and I'd run for the journal every Thursday evening. Mum would bring it back. But there's one to stay on. I remember one picture of on the front cover of a young fella sitting in a little pedal tractor rolling the pit. And that's just a vivid memory of reading the Farmer's Journal. But no, so to answer your question, I suppose since I was knee high, I was deeply ingrained. It was a small farm at home with, at that time, probably 25 cows. I suppose my first memories was probably just when quotas, unbeknownst to me, when quotas were introduced, actually.
And on that, you took it on as a career path and you studied agriculture after school. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, well, funny, it's interesting. Just there's probably, we've all got a bit of a sliding doors moment in our career. And I always wanted to farm, but my parents were quite adamant that, the farm's here and it's important that you get an education. And at that stage, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but agriculture was always on the cards. But when I was studying for my junior certificate, my father had he had injured his eye. And as a result of that, he had to take some time off work. So I dropped out of school intermittently, didn't sit the junior certificate, and was sitting probably in limbo as to whether I'd ever go back to school again. And I guess that sliding door moment was the careers guidance counsellor at St. McCartan's College, Monaghan, encouraged me to come back and said, look, don't worry about the juniors yet, we'll slot you into fourth year. And, I often think of that time, if I had said no and didn't go back, what would have happened? And as a result of that, went on, finished the leaving certificate. And then, I wasn't brainy enough to get enough points to get into UCD, but managed to travel across to England to Writtle College, which is in Essex, and had a great time there, a good Irish community there. And looking back, fantastic few years of my life. So studied BSc Ag in agriculture over there. And and then at that stage, didn't really know what life was going to bring. And New Zealand was on the cards, wanted to, have a travel over there and see what was happening. And have a recollection of one of my dairy lecturers, Dr. Howard, said to me, every dairy enthusiast should have New Zealand stamped in their passport. So lo and behold, in 2001, I came out here for a year, and here we are just over 20 years later. I'm still here.
Let's touch on the home farm for a minute, Olin. What were you doing on the home farm?
Yeah, so Dad's still milking there. He's milking about 40 cows now. So it's just a dairy farm, a couple of followers. And I suppose, look, typical, heavy ground, fragmented land, some of it subject to flooding. And I suppose even during university, my heart wanted to farm at home, but my head thought this is going to be challenging. And there was various options that I looked at, maybe, part-time farming and having a job off farm. But the reality was it was going to be a hard, you'd fall between two stools. So quotas were present at the time, and I suppose from an expansion point of view, there was a lot of barriers there. And look, maybe in hindsight, I had blinkers on as well. And I do often wonder if different set of eyes, how I may have looked at that. But sometimes you have to experience, the wider world to sort of look at those things. And then looking in hindsight's a lot easier as well.
And it's interesting, the contrast. You talk about finishing up with college in 2001. Very much a quota scenario in Ireland, the complete opposite in New Zealand. So you headed out there for a year and that turned into 20. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I suppose didn't really know what I was letting myself in for. Came here just off my own back, seen an advert there's a job agency advertising in the UK Farmers Weekly, and I contacted them, and they got in touch and said, look, there's a farm just outside of Hamilton, which I had no idea where it was at that particular time. They're looking for like a farm assistant. So I had my working holiday visa, landed out there not knowing a sinner, with nothing but a rucksack on my back, and was welcomed with open arms. With Colin and Karen Board were my first employers in New Zealand. There was a 550 cow farm, just a typical New Zealand farm, just 10 minutes outside of Hamilton, and settled in there sort of mid-season, arrived in October, so just finishing AI. But the first contrasting thing for me was driving down the road from the airport. I was thinking, where the heck's all the sheds? You know, I turned up on the farm, and I said, where's the rest of the sheds? And I said, this is it. So straight away, you know, the comparison with I suppose the lower amount of capital needed. This was a 550 cow farm. There was probably more sheds at home on Dad's farm. So look, stayed there for a year. Well, initially staying there for a year, and then was sort of gearing up to go home. And Colin came back to me, said, look, if you, I'll shout your trip home. I'll pay for your flight if you come back to work for us. You can see the powers of persuasion where it works. So look, jumped in plane, had a holiday, come back, did another year. And at this stage, I was still sort of thinking, don't really know what I'm going to do. And then I got shoulder tapped by a neighbouring farmer to see would I go a sole charge managing for him. And I don't really know. I suppose it just shows you maybe you're always being watched. I didn't know that I was being eyed up for this job, but I suppose it shows, you know, the message to many people is your reputation is on show all the time, and, you know, creating a good impression obviously opens doors for you. So then, as a result of that, Roger Hunt employed me in nearby Typery, just across the road from where I've been, to sole charge manage 270 cows. So here I was, sort of 2.5, 3 years in New Zealand, and I was managing a farm nearly 10 times as big as what we're milking at home. And suddenly then you sort of think, wow, there's opportunities here. Would I have got into a management position with this size as quickly as home? And the answer is probably no. So still at the crossroads. My mum would be sending me advertisements from jobs in the Farmers Journal and wondering what I was up to. And then I decided, well, I need to try for residency because there's a pathway here that I can see. Wasn't still fully committed to New Zealand, but got involved in some farming competitions, and taking part in some of those was a bit of sort of career planning and goal setting. And I worked with my now bank manager, working through some scenarios about going 50-50 share milking. And I realized, goodness me, it's actually not that hard. You know, I don't need that much more money to pick down a herd. So anyway, long story short, applied for the residency, got that. And then in 2006, the plot thickened greatly when I met my now wife, Anna. So now there was a pull factor to stay in New Zealand. And in tandem with that, I took on a contract milking role back in that previous farm where I started. So did 3 years there, got paid, so contract milking, got paid a set price per kg of milking, milk solid. I was responsible for the staffing and some small running expenses. And this was a great stepping stone, I suppose, to my future 50-50 career or share milking career, in the sense that you learn how to run your own business, the tax obligations and all those things. And then you learned how to manage staff and without a major mortgage over your head. Part of that salary package was I got 15 heifers every year as part of my package. So in 3 years, I had 45 yearlings and a sum of money, and I went and bought some. And then in 2009, we got our first share milking job, 300 cows in Eureka, still in the Hamilton area. There was another probably quite significant moment in my career then in 2008, contested the New Zealand New Zealand Farm Manager of the Year awards, and won the Waikato, which I was chuffed with, and went on to the Nationals and took out the national title. So that was fantastic as well. Just a really proud moment to think, you know, in just under 8 years was on the pinnacle of the managers or whoever else was competing, and that helped. So if you remember 2008, the financial crisis was just beginning, and the goalpost changed from a lending requirement, but thankfully having that recognition in the National Dairy Awards helped get the loan application across the line. So here we were, 2009, just starting a share milking job with 300 cows.
So that was your first big experience of share milking. How did that compare to the contract milking role, Olin?
Well, it was, I suppose, the first thing, it was downsizing in cows. So I suppose the intensity of, well, at that time, what I felt like was intensity of managing 550 cows was a little different. It was a pretty lean farm, that 300 cow farm. I managed to do that. I had a full-time spring helper for calving and AI, and then did it on my own thereafter. And really that set us up for good stead. It was a good farm. We had a pretty frugal farm owner. I just started up my share milking business and was pretty careful with cost, and we made some really good inroads there. I guess that the other probably pivotal thing in that too was owning our own herd. There was definitely a proud moment, and that little bit more, I suppose, more. You were more interested in the breeding and that, and the future of your herd. So my wife, well, we weren't married at this stage, but Anna, she was working off farm as a clinical dietitian in Hamilton Hospital. So I chipped away, and we were there for 4 years actually. But actually, in the last year, we lost 30 hectares of a lease block. So we sort of stood still there for a year, and we were sort of thinking where to next. And we kind of got a bit comfortable in the Waikato, and had some friends there, and didn't really want to move. And then our hand was forced somewhat. Just we needed to grow our business, and there wasn't a lot of jobs around. This was 2013, but we secured a job. 480 cows up in South Auckland, so actually half an hour from the airport. We spent 5 years there. That was a tough enough 5-year period. Well, look, there was some really good highs there. Both our children were born in that period. However, we had big fluctuations in production on that farm. It was a wet farm, it was a dry farm. We fluctuated 20,000 solids in from 1 year to the next, and it also coincided with the dreaded $3.80 payout. So luckily though, we weren't highly indebted at that time. But looking back, we probably sat in a holding pen. And once again, then, and this just highlights the high risk, high return thing with share milking. Once again, the farm went on the market, and we were left in limbo again, thinking where do we go? What do we do? And we explored from the tip of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island at various ventures, share milking, at equity partnerships. And as things turned out, ironically, we secured a position 12 minutes away from where we had moved at Hamilton to our present day location. So we're now share milking 650 cows here in Morrinsville since 2018. And interestingly, last year we then took on our old additional share milking job. 250 cow was now 250 because of that lost land. So all in all, we're just calving under 900 cows, albeit in 3 different sheds at 3 different parlours. But yeah, so look, it's been an interesting journey, but enough to you still plenty of challenges, and still enjoying every day you go to bed. You're pretty proud to be a dairy farmer, and not losing any passion yet. So that's the main thing.
And to pick up on a few things, Olin, like you had mentioned earlier in the conversation, based on, the career planning and goal setting, that you could see the figures adding up in terms of it wasn't going to cost you a whole lot to get into cows. So can you tell us a little bit about the system in terms of, I suppose, the value of the animal and what way the banking system worked at that stage in New Zealand?
Yeah, it's a very good point you bring up, Emma-Louise, because and I'm not sure whether things have changed, but I know talking to some people in Ireland trying to leverage off stock, and there was a no-go and using it as collateral. So just for example, in New Zealand, you had the value of the cow, and you could borrow 65% of that value. So for argument's sake, I had those I had 60 yearlings at the time, and if they were valued at $1,500 each, the bank would loan you 65% of that. So in essence, you're not not just, but you're nearly getting another, you're getting over half an animal for that money. So, you were building security quite quickly through livestock. So that to me was massive. Yes, I had cash saved up from the contract milking job, but being able to go in there with that livestock, and you can see then that was leveraged again in those additional moves. So that was a fantastic way, and I suppose it was tried and tested. I'm not sure, maybe you can fill me in. Is it still like, have the banks loosened their outlook of that in an Irish context, or?
Yeah, I would say that there is some acknowledgement of stock, and the amount of money that can be gained unsecured is rising. But I would say that they're still quietly cautious from an Irish context.
Yeah, because I mean, there's a whole host of really good things about that. If you think of a young person, so even for example, if you're on weight, so when I was contract milking, there wasn't a lot of expenses, and as a result, there was a high tax liability, so to speak. So buying additional young stock and grazing them, then that grazing cost could be offset against your profit. So, there's a fantastic way there of keeping your tax bill low, yet growing animals sort of way. And I guess it also gives you the opportunity to understand contracts and grazing contracts and how your business works. So you're sort of building a set of skills very early on, and then also doing those jumps incrementally. When you think of a cow, a cow is a magic machine that can recreate another cow, another young calf. So you're growing your numbers year on year as well, aren't you?
Absolutely. Another point that you mentioned is, you were very much Hamilton based, and you made that big move to South Auckland, and it is probably one of those moves, when we think about it, it's pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and getting comfortable with the unknown and the uncomfortable. How big a learning curve was that, in terms of really adjusting to a completely different farm type relative to what you'd been used to for over 10 years?
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I suppose in hindsight, I'm laughing now at thinking the enormity of an hour and a half up the road. But I suppose in the context of where we're at, we had a social circle here. We didn't have children at that time, so I suppose having friends nearby was important. And then I guess I had built my home from home, having I suppose I thought I'd made my one big move coming to New Zealand, and in a real Irish fashion, sort of got comfortable again in a local community. So, but sometimes I think, I often wonder, if I had been more ambitious and maybe moved to the South Island or whatnot. But in saying that, things have worked out okay. Now the farm, so it was on the fringes of Auckland, and we lived probably in a more lifestyle block, so there wasn't a lot of dairy farmers next door, and just that network was a bit more fragmented. Although as time went by, I established some good friendships and networks up there, but it was a different kettle of fish. And as I've mentioned, they're not as productive a land as here in the Waikato. So, but look, you put these things, as I say, we our two children were born there, and that was a pretty big event in our lives. So we look back with some good memories. Maybe the balance sheet didn't move as well as we want, but I guess it highlights some of those non-monetary things are as much just as important.
And a side point to the changing of farms is this idea of Gypsy Day. And on the 1st of June, you pack up lock, stock and barrel, and your life moves in overnight essentially. I was actually in New Zealand at that time of year back in 2012, and I found it fascinating, and it's something that you don't necessarily see in Ireland. Can you tell us a little bit about it, and is it a kind of a hectic experience, or is it enjoyable to move on to the new challenge?
Yeah, it's having done it 1, 2, 3 times, sort of moving with stock. I guess each time it gets easier and easier, but we actually take a step back and think, isn't it just pure mad when you think about it? So I guess historically the contracts are set to roll over. So each farming year is 1st of June to 31st of May. So that's more in context with the season. Cows are dried off. They'll begin calving in 6 weeks. So historically, that was the easy time for spring calving here. That was the easiest time to leave. However, if you think about it, I'm leaving to somewhere else. That person has to be out of the house for me. I can't go early because I can't get into their house. And then the person coming into my job can't get in early because I'm still there. And the same with the livestock. So take a hell of a lot of coordination. I guess when I come here first, most people sort of had a rough idea how it worked. And it's sort of unwritten rules about you can be in the house till 12 p.m. The stock, you can start moving stock a couple of days either side. You can start moving machinery, but this whole thing about relationship building it's so important, and particularly striking. And we were lucky that every time we moved, we struck a good relationship with the incumbent people on that property, because that's the key to it. Our last shift, I think we trucked just over 600 cows in one day, with all the units, but it didn't feel like that. So we had Anna took ownership of the domestic stuff. We 2 young kids, and I should mention them, Jack and Noah. Jack's 8 and Noah's 6. Great part of her life, but they were quite young. But Anna sorted the domestic stuff, and I looked after the machinery and the cows. And in our last shift as well, we took 2 of our staff with us, so we sort of overseeing the movement of them. But they were a great part of the shift, because you needed someone on the other end to unload your new cattle and that. So it is mad to think, like, one night you sleep on your old house, next morning your new place. And particularly this last time I arrived here in the darkness, I'd been on the farm a few times, but pretty bizarre walking out to a new property and all your cows are in a different paddock, and you think, wow, this is the new beginning here. So it is, when you mention it, about how bizarre, and the whole host of admin that's associated with that, changing phone accounts, changing addresses, changing power things, and all those sorts of things. But I suppose because it's happened so for so many years here, most people are reasonably familiar with it.
You've documented your career journey, Olin, and, farm assistant to management to contract milker to 50-50 share milker. Is the 50-50 share milker model the most preferable for you, across all of the roles that you have completed to date?
Absolutely, yeah. At this stage, it is, and I guess you've mentioned there. It's such a nice incremental sort of ladder. I've seen people jump from herd manager to 50-50 share milking, and so they've went from living on wages, getting paid every 2 weeks, having no sort of administrative stuff, to taking on a mortgage and learning how to run their own business. So that's a big step, whereas the others a lovely little stepping stone. Similarly, I've seen some people get a bit obsessed by the title, and they'll chase that contract milking role because they've seen that it's progress. But a lot of times, and it's all about doing due diligence in any sort of arrangement. You just gotta know your numbers, and you gotta use your gut instinct as well, and lean on your peers and your mentors for advice. And the example I'm using there, a farm manager might decide to go contract milking, and at the end of the day, he might be under. He might have been far better off waiting in that farm manager role for a number of years, banking that money, and wait for another opportunity. So I suppose my message there is just don't get too obsessed with the title. Just wait till the right move occurs, or so the right opportunity presents itself.
And at the outset of the conversation, you mentioned, a love of the land. And if we think about land from an Irish context, land ownership is ingrained in people. Is that something that you possess? And, in the future, is that what you're aiming for?
Yeah, so it's a tricky one. Absolutely, we definitely want to get our own place, but the conflict occurs then when you get the calculator out. It's like a land agent said to me one time. He says, "If you want to buy a farm, throw the calculator away." I mean, that's not totally true, but when you look at the returns out of the share milking business, I guess when you think about it, we've got only maybe 1/10 of the the capital tied up as the landowner, when we're getting the same money. However, we're doing a good deal of the work. And I used the saying high risk, high return. So it's very good high returning, but extremely high risk. And there comes a stage in your life that, when your kids are growing up and you're coming comfortable in a community, you want to be able to, put your roots down and put a marker in the sand. And that's what we're longing for. But we're also stuck in this, this comfort zone of in the Waikato. And unfortunately, land prices are out of kilter with their productive ability. However, in saying that, we're using the share milking business as a vehicle to, just to continue accumulating wealth. And I think looking at it optimistically, the definition of land ownership can be sliced and diced whatever way you want. Sometimes I think would you rather milk 180 cows on a 60-hectare farm, or be an equity partner in 400 cows? And I actually think critically look at that, I'd probably rather be in a larger farm, because I enjoy the challenges of working with staff, and there's a bit of variety. When you go back to that 180 cow farm, I've probably got a number of skills that you would probably never fully utilize. So that's kind of what's banting around with us. And I suppose there's one other key point. As a share milker, you are living a nomadic lifestyle. Like we're in equivalent to a rented house, and I suppose being unable to maybe put your own taste and flavor on the property you live in is something that we want to try and change. So yeah, look, we do spend plenty of time bouncing ideas, but I guess at the end of the day, cash is king, right? And just about position yourself for these things when they might come up. But there's no denying the share milking model it would be hard to walk away from, because it does generate good cash if you know what you're doing.
And to come back to a point now that you've mentioned several times, and it is the people, and even you mentioned, people moved with you from farm to farm. Starting out, you were quite young when you started managing people back in the mid-noughties, but, was it a big learning curve, and is there one or two big lessons from managing people that you've taken from it?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I never really, I'm just trying to search for an answer. I suppose probably one of the things that, and I've probably observed this more than experienced it, thankfully, is just when your business gets a bit bigger, it's just important not to be your staff's best friend. They got to be a line there. Now, I'm not saying a great working relationship is really, really good, but you just need to sort of keep that little bit of distance, because in times of conflict or in times of uncomfortableness, it's just a little bit easier to sort of clarify, who's in charge here, so to speak. I probably, I don't know whether this will last forever, whether my body can withhold it, but early in my early on years, I was a great believer of never getting somebody to do something I wouldn't do, and not be afraid to roll up your sleeves and jump into the trenches with them. And I was probably lucky to be able to do that, in the sense that I enjoyed every minute of it. I have found, though, as the business has grown, I'm probably spending only 60% of my time actually farming, and the other 40 is managing other aspects, be that there's a lot of paperwork now, and just even with, so we're dealing with two different owners, and there's commitments there with reporting and things, and not to forget our family as well, which I'm very grateful that the scale of our business allows me a bit more flexibility in some of those the family things. But I think particularly post-COVID, the realization is that we are extremely lucky. Like, we've got a team of people here, they've signed on for another year. We will never take that for granted, because the reality is, to find motivated, genuine, good people out there is very, very hard. And that's one big challenge that New Zealand farmers are facing right now, particularly with a strain on the border and sort of restrictions around who can get a visa and who not. So we should never take for granted the people we have. And I'm sure that's no different in an Irish context at this moment in time.
Yeah, and I think that there are two excellent points, Olin. Like, when you think about it, it is really important that there's a good working relationship, but in a way there is that line of charge on a farm, and also that idea of you stepping back from the parlour or stepping back from some of the day-to-day jobs. If we think about it, you're running 3 different parlours. You mentioned 2 landowners, so it can't all be the day-to-day stuff. And if it is, you kind of lose track of the bigger picture. I guess finally, Olin, if you think about the career path that you have laid out for yourself in New Zealand over the last 2 decades, and you bring yourself back to the Irish context now, like over the last decade, there's been massive expansion, and in the middle of that, quotas, effectively disappeared overnight. If you were starting out now in Ireland, do you think you could replicate it, here on the ground in Ireland?
Yeah, it's a tricky question, because I suppose it's hard not to deviate back to where I was at the start of my career in Ireland, and very much nearly a straitjacket on every farmer. And I often wondered how the abolition of quotas would turn out, because it was like nearly taking a walking frame away. And I don't mean this disrespectful, but there was that your whole farming philosophy was geared upside down when you look in from the outside in, from a New Zealand context, that you're actually forced to restrict your output, and then that's gone, how people responded. But obviously the switched on people have made great inroads. So sorry, go back to the question. I know I've been steadily growing over a number of years. Would I have got up to that scale? I don't think I would. We touched on one point. I think the ability to leverage off the cows and get the security over the cows has meant bigger jumps quicker. The other thing too, a lot more established farms of greater size that gives us the scale. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's potentially like a bottleneck if people are racing for that larger job. There's probably a lot less larger opportunities. I know lease farms seem to be opening up, but in a share milking context, there may not be the number of jobs for the people wanting them at that scale as well. Although the key thing, and I've seen it here in New Zealand, there's actually a lack of people with the ability to run large numbers. 2 things: people are struggling to accumulate the cash or the equity required to secure these big jobs, and then the other thing is the people management thing is huge, and not everyone's cut out for it. I just want to touch on one other comment, just going back to our staffing thing, with things you learn. I think another thing that we've been very lucky with in our growth phases, we've been able to offer higher positions for some of our staff, and that's kind of kept them hungry and kept them challenged. And I've no doubt that should hopefully continue. When I look at share milking and potentially leasing farms, there's a need for people to run those. So if we can have sort of ready-made people within our organization, it leaves that opportunity a lot easier to attain, because you've got someone ready to run it. So I thought that's just quite important about it's a win-win. You're growing someone for future prospects in your business, but you're also growing them as a person. So I think it was just worth noting that.
Absolutely. This has been a really interesting conversation, Olin. And while you are at the other end of the world, there are so many things that we can take from the conversation, like from the outset, talking about, those sliding door moments that get you to where you are, when you reflect on the journey, but also the various skills that you have garnered along the way, across the last 2 decades of your farming career. Thank you, Olin.
Thanks, Emma-Louise. Thanks for the opportunity.
That's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast, and my thanks to Olin Greenan for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple and Google Podcasts as well as Spotify, and for more information go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm Emma-Louise Coffey, and join me next time for your Dairy Edge.